In this podcast, Dr. Sean Hillier, a Mi'kmaq scholar from York University and member of the Halapoo First Nation, delivers an afternoon keynote address titled Indigenous Approaches to Aging: How Can We Achieve Living the Good Life During Our Later Stages of Life? Dr. Hillier's research, shaped by his work with Indigenous communities worldwide, emphasized 7 interconnected themes: culture, community, holistic health, spirituality, respect, land, and resilience. He uses these themes to highlight colonial barriers that have disrupted traditional ways of aging, such as the imposition of age-based service restrictions and the systemic disconnect between generations.
Good afternoon, everyone. What an exciting day it's been. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. As I was introduced, my name is Sean Hillier. I'm a Mi'kmaq scholar. I was born and raised on the southwest coast of Newfoundland. I'm a member of the Halapoo First Nation, come from a tiny little community of 200 people called Westside Center, just on a tiny little peninsula right on the west coast. And so I kind of have posed for the talk overall, is how can we achieve the good life during our later stages of life? Of what does it mean to help people age well? When I think about aging, I don't necessarily think about health. I think that this is a misconception that as you age, aging well means that you're aging healthy. But what does it mean to live that good life, to be supported, to be healthy in your hearts, to be healthy with your community during that process? And this is in great contrast to how we think about Western modes of how we treat and care for people. When we think about aging as both a social and colonial construct. So the defining purpose when we think about colonization was to break down the communal role within communities, to break apart the family, to remove the children, to remove grandparents from those children, from communal child raising. I think we've heard about some of this already this morning. And that was an important part of the colonial project. And so this disconnection was key, it was seen as key to maintaining power and exerting control over Indigenous peoples in their lives by implementing a heteronormative understanding of the family, of how we think about community child raising. And so the ongoing impact of Southern colonialism is to maintain these systems of disconnection. And we specifically see policies that continue to be enacted that continue to necessitate the disconnection of people, and specifically the disconnection of older folks with younger folks. Today, we are aging in a Western society and within a biomedical construct. And so what does that mean? It means that we really have to look at how is aging being defined, by whom, and when do we get to age, and how do we get to age? One of the big things that came out of my initial work was around aging as a number and the construct of the fact that you age at 65, right? You start to get benefits at 67, you get other benefits as you continue to hit these numbers. And so we don't provide services for people where they are. Instead, we put in a kind of very scripted number to say at 65, you can get access to this, but if you're 64, even though you have a great need for those services, we won't provide them to you. This was a realization, again, by Indigenous organizations that we have to do something differently. Our people aren't making it to 65, so let's ensure that they can get what they need when they need it. And where and how we get to age is an important construct that for the past 3 years, I've been on the board of the Native Canadian Centre in downtown Toronto and served as the board president. And we deal a lot with navigation issues of people who are forced into large urban centres, into Toronto, to access care. And they are so fearful because all that they need to have happen is that their test gets delayed or their doctor's meeting gets delayed. And for some people, that will mean that they can't get their change of ticket fee covered by the federal government. So if the First Nation doesn't cover it, then they're stuck in Toronto and they won't get back to their community. And for the most part, we're still neglecting our older folks. In many ways, I see, and when I talk to lots of my friends who are not Indigenous, we live to make money and to die, right? Like there's this focus of ramp up of be successful, make tons of money, save your money, live that life there, but then after 65, you're not really that useful to anybody anymore, and that will go away. And that is a very scary thing. When we talk about the fear of death that we heard about earlier, and that I've heard from lots of people, this is what makes death scary. This is what makes getting old scary, is this disconnection, this dislocation, this movement, this not feeling valued, respected, needed, wanted by others. And so this is what our team has been working on and thinking about, is around a community-focused and connected life as a way of thinking about living the good life. So by centering the following interconnected elements into our work: culture, community, holistic health, spirituality, respect, land, and resilience, Indigenous people can more readily achieve living the good life and age with dignity, connection, and purpose. So what does it mean to grow old and having the ability to speak your language, eat your traditional foods, or practice your ceremonies? The mother tongue, our connection to food, is something that grounds us. Again, language, hearing their language being spoken, learning a language at an older age has significant promise. I think it's an area that we don't spend a lot of time on. We say we want to focus on providing language to our young ones, to our adults, so they can carry on the language. And lots of older folks will say that that's what my grandparents spoke, that's what my parents spoke, and I never learned it because of this disconnection and the importance that that has on this idea of identity. One of the big themes that we heard overall around the world was this idea of the responsibility of older adults to engage with younger people, to pass on their knowledge, do those things. So it was an innate sense of responsibility that was missing, that added to the good life. So respect was a huge piece that we heard, that people don't feel respected, people don't come to spend time with them, their family doesn't have time for them, and that this is a sign of not having respect for what's happening. The intergenerational connectedness was a significant one. Here in one of the centers, so this is the seniors program area in a community center, and what do you think is on the other side of those doors? Kids. So there's children's programming and early on education program next door. The two never interact. We are so risk averse of placing children with our older folks. What if something happens? What if they get pushed? What if somebody trips? Then there's a liability sense. And this has meant that we have all kinds of youth and children programming happening and very little connection with the young folks. The example that they were providing was how much joy the Christmas concert gave to the Indigenous seniors in this program in an urban center when the children came in and gave them a Christmas concert. And they were like, they love it and they light up, and we were like, well, isn't that a bit of a promising practice that maybe we can think about what does that actually mean and look like on an ongoing basis, that it shouldn't be the one-off. And I'm not talking about one way of knowledge learning. So this isn't a older adult teaching a young person. We've seen some really innovative programming where older folks are coming for help from younger people. IT support, teach me new things that are happening in science. There are these opportunities to engage in this bimodal knowledge exchange that takes place that really adds to the overall sense of purpose for both groups. So holistic health and wellness. So when we think about a balance of mind, body, emotion, and spirit, we must deploy models or develop models of care that meet folks where they are as they age. Certainly we want our older folks to be healthy and have good physical health, but that physical health will diminish. So the emphasis we need to be placing on things is how do we ensure that the mental, emotional, and spiritual factors are increased during that time of life, that connection is increased, that we refocus down on bringing joy back to what that life means. Plainly, we talk about connection with nature, land-based activities, plant medicines that supplement our Western healthcare approaches. Spirituality and a sense of purpose. I think there's a whole lot of belonging issues happening within our communities of people who say, I'm not Indigenous enough, I don't belong. And then others will say, I look Indigenous, people will accept me as Indigenous, but I don't have the teachings, I don't speak the language, and therefore I don't feel like I belong also in these programs. And so when we think about spirituality and a sense of purpose, I think that's the important part, is meeting people where they are, is understanding what their needs are in this personal way through that connection. But having opportunities for sacred and ceremonial life, so ceremony, prayer, other practices that can provide comfort, guidance, and a sense of grounding as one grows older. Right? Lots of elders will say, oh, like, I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of that process. I'm afraid that my body, my spirit isn't going to be cared for when I die properly. These are real fears that are happening that impede a good life, a healthy aging process. When these are the fears that people have and really hold on to, it really promotes ill health in some of those other important quadrants. Connection to the land. We have to recognize lands as a source of well-being. And I think we heard this today. We hear that the university is taking that into account as they build out this new care facility, but regular and ongoing engagement with nature, be it through ceremony, through practices that get them out hunting, or simply daily activities support emotional and spiritual well-being. The ability to connect with the land in a meaningful way has significant impact on people's wants and desires. Their ability to connect with youth, etc., are all focused around this issue of land. But we also have been in many communities where there's lots of land, and people will say, there's no opportunity really for me to go out in a way that makes sense for me. A lot of hunters will experience this, that they're too slow, they feel like a burden. And for some older folks, they say, we rely on the community freezer, and I can't contribute to that. And stewardship and responsibility. So lots of older folks we spoke with talked about their role in advocating for the protection of lands, animals, waters, and ecosystems, that this goes hand in hand with ensuring the health of the community and themselves. And so how are we providing roles and opportunities for them to be able to be the people that can stand behind our warriors, as one elder said, right? She was like, I'm not going to go out and be at the forefront anymore, but I can be listened to, I can share my stories, I can share my insights, if you engage me, we can be there, because I see that as a role and responsibility that I have that I can contribute. And finally, adaptation and resilience. So how do older adults navigate multiple worlds? So Indigenous older folks are experiencing very unique challenges between balancing a traditional lifestyle with Western mainstream systems in healthcare, in education, and technology. One of my postdocs is currently working with a First Nation out in BC, learned their traditional language over 8 years, taught at their elementary school, and there are only 14 fluent speakers of this language. And we went back and we were having some conversations because they were interested in language, revitalization, etc. And so we're working with them to develop an AI large language model for their language. That the seniors are contributing 40 plus hours a week of trying to train this model. So we need to learn this. Once they understood, they said, we need to be in this technology to preserve our language, because once we all die in the next number of years, our language will be gone. And the youth are really bad at speaking it, so they slang everything. And so they were like, we could use this to really ensure the language is going to be spoken the way it should be spoken. Maybe be able to help preserve their language. And they said, even if it doesn't, it was worthwhile to try, right? Because we have to, and I think that this is the crux we're at, of so many of our folks are passing on with this knowledge, that we're losing this knowledge. And so how can we adapt in this new world to support our older adults in really innovative ways? And then this flows into so for the Mi'kmaq, the seven sacred teachings, we hear it as the seven grandfather teachings, but many communities across this land, we're talking about the 7 grandfather teachings: wisdom, love, respect, bravery, honesty, humility, and truth. They serve to guide each of us on how to live well. From that moment we take our first breath and are placed in the cradle to our grave, it's about how do we live out these teachings, wisdom we can learn, the need for respect of one another. It takes a lot of bravery for our older folks to engage our younger folks, just as our younger folks need to be brave to want to engage with our older folks. Honesty, humility, and then that truth. And so all of this comes back to say is that like we're really seeking to create roots to ground our work. And this is supposed to mimic roots going into the ground that are interconnected elements that we have talked about: culture, community, holistic health, spirituality, respect, land, resilience, are the foundational roots to good health, to good relationships, to that intergenerational connection that we have. That by going back to these basic principles that we're able to achieve so much. I'm going to end with a story of what's happening in New Zealand. We had a really interesting opportunity to go down and meet with the local iwi, and they talked a bit about some of the really innovative work that they're doing there. They had a significant land claim settlement that happened a number of years ago. They took much of that money and invested it quite well. And they invested it in lots of different ways. They used the Western capital markets, but they did a whole lot of work to determine where their priorities needed to stand as a community to build back this connection to one another. And they started by getting their young people educated. They said, we are going to spend a ton of money right now on our young people to get them the mentorship, the education, whatever they need to do. We're going to pay for them to go to the best and brightest universities, whether they're in New Zealand or they're in the United States or elsewhere. And then these folks are going to come back with that knowledge and education to us. And then they pumped a ton of money into those young people with their education to start businesses, to bring money back into the community. And they trained them in lots of really up and coming areas. One of them being old age care in New Zealand, where there was a huge gap. And the tribe, the iwi, built a long-term care facility. But this long-term care facility, based around their values and how they think about how older adults need to age and how they should be treated, was not for their seniors. It was for the white folk outside. And that they were going to provide really good care. They were going to pay for their people to run these facilities, to be employed by these facilities, to care for these white people that had come here, and that they were going to charge them and make money and reinvest that back in the community into intergenerational housing. And so they have now built an expansive number of intergenerational homes with the very issues where they talked about of the first floor being for the older folks in the family. So that way they have a fully accessible, kind of isolated part of their home, but that the family would live upstairs. The youth will live upstairs, that there could be multiple generations of family living in these large purpose-built houses. And then they started another program where they said, if you have somebody who needs support in your house, as an iwi, we will pay you to care for that person as long as they need. So as you have somebody who is close to death, you can take a leave from your job and we will pay your full salary for you to be there and care for them through that process. Because that is foundational to who we are as a people and our responsibility to one another. And since then, they've now started developing a proposal for elementary schools that will be directly tied back to their older folks who are going to now be actively engaged in that education process, to be the educators in those schools, to be connected and have purpose within the community of serving their very specific role of being connected with those young people. And so they are slowly working through this circle that we talked about here, focusing where they saw that initial opportunity with their youth, and they've gone back and now they're doing all kinds of other innovative things around language learning, et cetera, the community. And so I think it's a really interesting opportunity to learn from, and that's what we were there for, to really understand what are some really innovative pieces that are happening, not only in Canada, but around the world. So where do we go from here? There is a no one size fits all approach, and that's why I've come back to kind of re-highlighting these key 7 pieces, because there is going to be no one size fits all approach. But when we start thinking about these questions as a framework to thinking about what it means to live a good life for older folks, then we can make those purpose-built approaches for the specific communities, and how can they perhaps adapt maybe 1 or 2 of those things as they think through that to become more comprehensive. I think overall, we need to reimagine what growing old should be like, not just for Indigenous people, but for everybody. This is a model that we should be aspiring for all older folks, and creating that connection yet again. Thank you.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Trent Center for Aging in Society, produced by Matthew Deshaw and Nadine Chang-Foot. Miigwech, and thank you for tuning in.